10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Game over.
Welcome to Game Over Montreal, a fifth straight win in this economy. How absurd. I can't believe we are at this point, and at the same time, the Toronto Maple Leafs are about to possibly blow a 7-2 lead against the lowly Detroit Red Wings. So let's talk about it with my guest, Jared Book. How's it going, Jared?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, and as people may notice, I've got an extra little bit here on the stream chat. I've got like just a shot of Steve Dangle to give us an idea of how the Leafs are doing. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger actually, because it's a little bit small. I don't know if people can see. And just look at the look on Steve's face. Oh, somebody says it's 9-7 now. That's annoying. I hope they actually tie it up, because it would just be too good. But Steve's face, this is a capture from his stream that he's currently doing. It's pretty amazing what's going on right now in Detroit. I mean, Detroit has some skill for sure, but Jack Campbell, Peter Mrazek, you gotta stop a shot once in a while. Like, what is going on here? But let's talk about the Montreal game, because this isn't a Leafs stream. I know people get upset a little bit when we talk about the Leafs, but let's be honest here. The Maple Leafs are the main character, right? Like, every year they're the main character. But let's talk about Montreal, because that's a little bit more fun for the fans of this team, because five straight now, Jared. Something that the Leafs or the Canadiens haven't done, I believe they said on the broadcast, since 2016-17. What a turnaround.
Yeah. You mentioned goaltending when you mentioned the Leafs. I mean, that's what Montreal is getting now, right? They're getting saves. Samuel Montembeault is making saves. Andrew Hammond is making saves. It's what they couldn't get. Like, they're getting like 800 save percentage, like through like the lengthy losing streak. Yeah, I mean, that was just, you knew it was going to come back to the middle a little bit. But that's a key part of why they're winning. I mean, they weren't winning 2-1 games, 2 weeks ago.
No, and the thing is, if the Leafs can come out of this and win a 9-7 game and not blow it, I feel like it's actually something good that they can like get close to blowing it and not blowing it. But yeah, the Canadiens weren't winning the 2-1 games either. It's crazy how bad the goaltending has been for most of the season for the Montreal Canadiens, to how good Montembeault and Hammond have been in this short stretch. And I feel like we got to spend some time on Hammond, because he was the Hamburglar for the Ottawa Senators. This is the second start for the Canadiens. It would almost be more perfect if it was his first, but I thought both him and Matt Murray, despite this game not being like absolutely thrilling, were pretty great tonight. Like, I would go so far as to say that like Matt Murray in particular made some sensational saves. Hammond, I thought, just like did an excellent job of sticking with the puck, because the Senators are very good at moving it laterally and kind of creating chaos. He wasn't necessarily making incredible saves like I think Matt Murray made several times, but he was just always in the right spot, and that's basically what you need.
Yeah, I mean, how long has it been since the Montreal Canadiens goaltender just made the saves that he needed to make? Like, it's been so long. Like, it's making people think back to like the playoffs and Gary Price. Like, that's how, like, Jake Allen was good at the start of the season, but I mean, it wasn't happening very often, especially recently. The last few months has been awful. But I mean, there's lots of parts of the team that were awful, but it's just so refreshing to get goaltending where a mistake isn't automatically going to end up in the back of the net. And I think that that's kind of what Martin St. Louis is kind of preaching a little bit. But you mentioned Montembeault and Hammond. I mean, how long has it been since Montreal had the goaltenders that were like the good story, right? Like, it's always like the French Canadian goaltender who comes into Montreal and gets a shutout in his first game or something. And now it's Montreal getting Montembeault, who gets his first shutout, in his home province. And then Andrew Hammond goes to Ottawa and wins a game in Ottawa. Like, it's been a while since Montreal has had that story. It's usually happening to Montreal. It's the whole like first NHL goal against them kind of thing all over again.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, just not having the first goal go in within the first couple of minutes seems to be the biggest difference maker. for this team, because like all season long, even Jake Allen, when he was playing really well, it seemed like the first goal was going in on like the first or second shot of the game, and it's just deflating. And I know, like, talking to a lot of people around the league this year for this show, analysts, scouts, what have you, the key to what made them, effective last year was really the fact that they were able to get leads in the playoffs and then capitalize on mistakes on the counterattack. They haven't been able to do that this year because they haven't had leads. Like, they've been trailing from the outset, and that's really exposed all their weaknesses. It's been really incredible to see them turn things around, and like you mentioned, like St. Louis, what he's preaching is obviously getting through. But just being able to not be down all the time is gigantic.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so long since, when the 1-1 goal went in, I was like, oh, right, that's what happens when you leave a guy wide open in the slot. Like, it's been a while since that happened for them. Like, the Canadians have done that all year, where they've left guys completely wide open. And then, it happens today, and I don't remember the last time it happened. That's, that's like the biggest, testament you can give to Martin St. Louis, is that it's been a while since a guy was wide open in the slot and scoring goals. And that's what happened today, but they bounced back, to their credit. And it's refreshing. Like, the guys seem to be having fun again, and they all say it, and it's all like, it just takes such a load off. I think you mentioned being from behind all the time. Like, I just think that they just don't, it doesn't matter anymore. It's refreshing, to see it, to watch it as a fan, like, or even as a fan, but just watching it is so much more pleasant than it had been, and I think that it's funny because there's certain stages of this season, right? There was the GM change, there was, hiring of Kent Hughes, there was the firing of Dominic Ducharme, and it seems like the firing of Dominic Ducharme and the hiring of Martin St. Louis is the first time where it really, you notice the difference on the ice, and that's normal, right? Because GM changes don't affect the on ice product very quickly. But it just seems like that's the one where people are like, okay, now we can start looking towards the future.
Yeah, and as you say that, Marner scores his fourth of the game in the Toronto game, puts up to 10-7 now.
At 7.
That's probably out of reach. I think the Detroit Red Wings are done here. I don't know if they're going to score 3 more goals in 4 minutes. So unfortunate, but we're going to keep Steve's face in the stream because it's just too funny not to have it.
If any team is going to lose, if any team is going to lose 11-10, though, it's going to be Toronto, right?
Oh, like, absolutely.
If any team does that, it's Toronto. So, but yeah, I think 10-7 is a little bit out of reach. But I think something else just happened because my timeline is going crazy again. So I don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't.
There's something always happening. It's just
it feels like the David Ayres game where the whole timeline is just laughing at Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, and for good reason. How do you give up 7 goals and win the game, though? I mean, that's kind of impressive from that respect. All right, so I have some notes here from during the game, and I have to say I'm a little bit annoyed that Corey Schooneman has been so damn good because I haven't memorized how to spell his name yet, and that's throwing me off a little bit. But I will say he has been a great surprise.
Yeah, one of the good things about covering the Rocket is I had to learn that very early last year. And there was one game when it was they had Schooneman, they had Jack Eye in the preseason as well. Like just like complete names where you're like, it's just crazy. Like last year's Rocket had a couple of players like that. But they had Hisamunanov was another guy who the Rocket had last year, and so the spelling was a challenge early on. But yeah, Schooneman's been great, and I think that we talk about guys getting their chance and running with it, and the obvious ones are Michael Pezzetta, Laurent Dauphin, even a little bit this year, but Corey Schooneman's like taking that job and like running with it. Like he just provides something that like no one else in this Canadiens defense does, which is weird to say, but I just. Yeah, exactly. Just like he doesn't have to play 20 minutes and he's just there and he makes the smart play, and it's subtle a lot of the time, but there's so often where subtle is not what this Canadiens defense has done well. But yeah, it's just it's good to see him because he's a guy who, look, a year ago at this time, like he didn't even have an NHL contract or like a year and a half ago at this time, like he was on an AHL contract the start of last season, an NCAA free agent playing the ECHL, and now he is basically one of the top 6 defensemen on the Montreal Canadiens, and depending on what happens in trading, the trade deadline, he's might have more ice time coming up as well.
Yeah, I would say he will have more ice time coming up. It's funny, sometimes the stats bear out your eye test, and sometimes they don't. Because watching this game, I thought that Alex Romanov and Ben Sherratt struggled mightily, and those are the guys. They are the 2 leaders in both expected goals for percentage and Corsi for percentage, according to Natural Stat Trick. Would not have called that, but I know they spent a lot of time on the ice with the top line. But the fact is, both of them are above 85% expected goals for percentage. That's pretty impressive. So I'm not going to criticize them tonight, even though I was planning to, because the stats bear out that they had a pretty decent game. But one person who I will criticize, despite the fact that he is playing better, is Mike Hoffman. I think since the coaching change, he has been far more engaged. He's very clearly, I think, like he cares now. He's trying. However, every single game, and I said this on Twitter, he does 4 or 5 things where I'm like, what on earth possessed you to do that? And he did it twice tonight on the same power play where he just he has time, he has space, and he's like, I'm going to throw the puck right in between the 2-point men for no reason whatsoever. And it's just I don't understand if he's just he has a malfunction in his brain and does the worst possible thing, but he seems to just do that every single game. I don't understand it. Where's this coming from? I know I said that and Senators fans were in my mentions yeah, that's his whole career, but I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's he has 2 modes. It's shoot, and if that option is not there, he just doesn't have a second option, and he just panics. But it's funny because you mentioned being more engaged as the coaching change. There's one game, I think it might have been the overtime game where Caulfield scored, where he made 2 defensive plays.
Yes.
In overtime.
Yes.
And I'm like, whoa. He can play defense, and it's just he's been he's not known to be a defensive player, but he just sometimes he gets it right, but sometimes he just gets it wrong. And yeah, you mentioned, I think it's just a byproduct of a guy who has the puck on his stick a lot, and I think that's kind of his strength. Even on the power play, he's not the quarterback, but he's kind of like Caulfield in the sense that he likes to have the puck on his stick a lot. And I think that the problem with that is that sometimes, and the Canadiens power play has been dreadful anyway, that sometimes there's just not an option. He just kind of struggles. But yeah, he's a frustrating player, but at least I feel like since the coaching change, they're at least playing into his strength. They're not trying to say, hey, Mike, play defense.
Yeah, they're not sticking in with Nick Suzuki and saying play on the shutdown line.
Right. And I feel like that's where Dominic Ducharme struggles so much, is that he was trying to fit everybody in, he was trying to make everybody the same player, right? And it just wasn't work. And I don't want to get too much into Dominic Ducharme because we're past it, but I feel like that's the biggest difference, is that you look at the Canadiens now and everyone looks like a different player. Like Caulfield looks like Cole Caulfield, and Nick Suzuki looks like Nick Suzuki. And it's not like Jake Evans looks different. And it's just everyone kind of is playing into that kind of, their own individuality. And I think that that's kind of what's behind this team looking so much more free, is that they just are looking that way. And even a guy like Schooneman, right? Under Ducharme, he was just kind of there. And now he's just making plays, and even Chris Weidman is doing little things like that. It just seems like it's so much better for everyone involved, and it's such an indictment, I think, on how things were before. That just players being themselves is this huge accomplishment. It's just crazy. I don't know. I feel bad for Ducharme too, because I don't think he's that bad of a coach, but man, he was bad.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying recently, is I feel like in a couple of years, we're going to see a situation where Ducharme actually does have some NHL level success, and he's going to rehab his image quite a bit. But the confluence of events that happened here, and he was a part of the failure, and the fact that it's turned around so quickly under St. Louis, it makes him look awful. And maybe he won't look as awful by season's end, because eventually this winning streak is going to go away, and they probably will start losing a bit more often, because let's face it, the roster is still not great, but he looks terrible. There's no way to get around it. He looks terrible right now.
But
And
it just feels like everyone on this coaching staff was here with Ducharme. Everyone, Burrows, Richardson, Letowski, they're all there. And this is all it really took is Marty St. Louis saying, "Hey guys, when there's two guys on one guy, that means somebody's open. Don't do that." Like, did it take one guy to come in and like make that change? Like, it's so weird that everything is just gone. Like, I just feel like he was stuck in between trying to get this roster to the playoffs and trying to coach the way he can coach. Like, I don't know if I feel like I during the playoffs last year, it was a little bit different because the game completely different and the players just kind of took over. And it's funny because when you're down 3-1 to Toronto, and I don't want to, I know we're supposed to be talking about this game, but when you're down 3-1 to Toronto, he just kind of said, "Okay, guys, go." And that's what they did. And then this year he reverted back to play defense. And this team is not built to play defense. Like,
no,
you don't get Mike Hoffman and Jonathan Drouin and Josh Anderson and say, "Hey guys, let's win 2-1." And I feel like he was trying to win every game 2-1. And the problem with that is that when you're not getting good goaltending and you're down 2-0 after 10 minutes, you're not going to win the game 2-1. And I just feel like I don't think he's a bad coach, but I think he was a bad coach for this team. And I think that that's what's playing out I don't even know if Marty St. Louis is going to be a good coach, but he's the perfect coach for right now. And I think that that's what you're seeing right now. And I think that that's the difference, is that they're going from a coach that was not right for this situation to a coach that's absolutely perfect for this situation. And the pressure is different too, right? Like, Dominic Ducharme entered this season trying to make the playoffs, and Marty St. Louis is trying to, not lose 7-1 every night.
yeah,
Like, they're very different expectations. But
I don't even know if
I
it's
think
that. I think Marty St. Louis is just trying to get the guys to have fun. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think how many times have they mentioned that since he came aboard, right? Just make hockey fun again. And
Yeah.
I mean, clearly he's accomplished that, and there are guys on this team who want to compete. You look at Arturi Lehkonen tonight, you look at Brendan Gallagher tonight. Those guys absolutely wanted to get this done. Arturi Lehkonen obviously was the one who accomplished it. We got a request here to talk about Sherratt on the power play, and I will talk about that, even though I said I wasn't going to criticize him. But I got to talk about Brendan Gallagher a little bit first, because like I just, what does he got to do to score at 5-on-5? 0 5-on-5, 0 even strength goals this year. He has an expected goals of 7 at 5-on-5. 0. Like, give him a bone. He could have had 2 tonight.
That's his bread and butter too, right? Like, all throughout the years, last like 4 or 5 years, he's been one of the top 5-on-5 producers in the NHL, right? Like, his numbers don't show up because he doesn't get power play goals usually, because the Canadiens power play has been a black hole for the last few years. But I mean, that's his bread and butter, right? Like, it's in Cole Caulfield is shooting like 1%. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to turn around. Like, it's unnaturally low, right? Like, even mentioned the goaltending before, like Sam Montembeault getting a 700 save percentage, like, it's going to turn around. Like, nobody is that bad. And so it's just frustrating for him, because he's somebody who cares so much that, like, when he's not scoring, it like really seems to, like, I don't think it's affecting him that much, because I think the team's winning and I think that that's what he cares about. But man, yeah, he's going to get a goal at some point, but it's just funny to see his reactions to, like, even when he like gets called for a penalty, it's obvious. He just looks like, "Oh, what are you doing to me? Like, how are you doing this to me?"
I will say he did look frustrated at times tonight, and I feel like that's part of the issue with Hoffman tonight. Is you could tell he really wanted to score against the Ottawa Senators, and he was doing stuff that maybe wasn't very smart in order to accomplish that. And Gallagher as well, like, he really, really wanted to score tonight. And I think once he does get that one goal, he's probably going to go on a run just like Caulfield has.
Yeah.
But I just feel bad for him. There are so many times where he just almost gets it, and he actually almost like 3 times tonight he could have scored. It was crazy. Yeah. And when they were dogpiling him for going after Matt Murray in the third period there, he actually, like, the puck was loose. Gallagher was in the right.
It was loose.
I know he's never going to get the benefit of the doubt, and players will jump guys for anything around their goaltender, but Gallagher, it was the puck was loose. All right. One thing I did want to talk about also before we start talking about Sherratt on the power play is, the Canadiens have not started super well in games in terms of like the underlying numbers under St. Louis. They've kind of like gotten going as the game has gone along, and this one fits that really well. They were better than the Senators in all three periods at even strength, but in the final two frames, they outchanced the Senators according to Natural Hat Trick at 5-on-5, 18-3. They allowed 0 scoring chances at even strength in the third period, 3 in the second period. That is the like prototypical lock it down style. And I got to say, it's nice to see, like, I know that things have kind of been going well for them overall. And I think Caulfield, again, probably could have had 2 or 3 goals tonight based on the shots that he was getting. And obviously, he didn't get one tonight, which is unfortunate because I want him to keep rolling on because it's such a great story. But to be able to win the 2-1 grinded out games where you've earned a good fate by the numbers, but aren't like getting the results that you want, I feel like that's also a confidence booster for this team because they frankly have not won a game like this, I don't think, this year at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And even for St. Louis to win a game where the first line isn't carrying the team, on the road, especially, like I think that all those things are good things for this team. And good coaches will say good teams win different styles of games. And the Montreal Canadiens are not a good team, right? Like let's put that on, like they're not a playoff team right now, obviously. But they are playing well right now, and it's because they're winning different types of games. Like, and yeah, this kind of 2-1 game where they're getting the saves they should be getting, and they're getting timely scoring. Like the last time that happened was the playoffs. Like it literally, like even this year, like they didn't win close games. Like they beat, like Pittsburgh and Nashville, like in those like high scoring, like kind of blowout games. And I just don't know, like their record in 1-goal games must be awful. I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, but it just feels like they haven't won a close game very often this year.
I mean, they haven't won any games very often this year.
Right. Yeah. I'm kind of disappointed in that because I was kind of hoping that they would win fewer games than they won in the playoffs last year, which kind of seems out the window at this point. But I was kind of like, that'd be. I bet you it never happened before. But yeah, no, it doesn't look likely now. But at least it's fun to watch this team again. I mean, yeah. That's the main thing.
That's like the biggest thing is, obviously we are paid to watch this team. So
Yes.
we have to watch it no matter what. We don't get to tune out. If I wasn't paid to watch this team, I definitely would have tuned out this season until the coaching change, pretty much. But for everyone else who is still tuning in and, continue to tune in because they live and die by the crest on this sweater, this is phenomenal. And I know that there's a lot of people who are like, don't screw up the pick. But there's not a lot that the Canadiens can do to really push their way up the standings too far. Like if we go to the league standings page, they're still in 31st after this win. No, yeah, 31st. Sorry, I was like, there are 32 teams now. Yeah, 32 teams. So they have jumped ahead of Arizona, who actually have a game in hand, and if they were to win, could jump them back into 32nd, which is kind of funny. But they might catch Seattle. They probably won't catch Buffalo. Like Buffalo's 7 points ahead, and I know there's 29 games left, but 7 points, like as a spread in 29 games, is legitimately difficult to accomplish. And yeah, and even if they do, as long as they keep within the bottom 5, they have a decent shot at first overall. I just don't see the bad in it. I think that getting people like Caulfield and Suzuki playing confidently again is worth more than the difference between Shane Wright and the next best player. I like Shane Wright a lot, and I think a lot of the people who criticize Shane Wright as a pick are off base, but I think that it's important to get what you have going, and I had Shane Malloy on the show, probably a month ago now, and we were talking about like what the Canadians need to do to go forward and like build themselves a contender. And everyone wants to look at what they're going to be building going forward, and like the picks that they get, the assets they bring back at the trade deadline. But it starts before then. Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton and their incoming development team need to take what's already in the organization and develop that going forward, right? Like they need to take those players and get the absolute maximum out of every single one that they can, because if they don't, the like turning this around becomes incredibly difficult, right? You have to get like Jesse Ylonen should be an NHL player, like maybe not an amazing one, but somebody who can come in and play NHL quality minutes. I think we saw some of that this year, right? But he can be better. Get the best out of everyone that's currently in the organization. We've already seen, Kent Hughes meeting with Harris, and now he thinks they are going to sign him. So like that's another boon. But getting the best out of all their defensive prospects, Caden Gooley, develop him the right way. We saw Victor Mete tonight, who looked good at times and bad at times. I think if Victor Mete came in during this regime, I think we'd be seeing a heck of a lot better of a player.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned guys they have. I mean, Matthias Norlinder kind of screams out like, just they didn't handle him very well at all. And I think that's the big thing, right? Like you talk about retool, rebuild, whatever word you want to use, it doesn't make a difference. But if this team doesn't get Nick Suzuki to be the player that they think Nick Suzuki can be, they're paying him a lot of money to be a not very good player. Cole Caulfield, like if you don't want to go like scorched earth and hit rock bottom, you need those guys. Like you need Cole Caulfield to score goals. You need all these things to happen. Like you need Alexander Romanov to be a top 4 defenseman. You need these guys to hit. And I think that that's the major thing that they didn't, like the reason why they're in this situation, because they weren't getting guys to hit, right? Whether it's Nathan Beaulieu or Michael McCarron or Nikita Sherbak or Noah Jolson. And there's different circumstances for all those players, but they got none of them to hit, right? Like, and not only did they get none of them to hit, but none of the secondary guys came up either, right? Like it was just like nothing was happening. But now you look at what's going on, and you look at Caulfield and Suzuki, and those are the big ones. Romanov, those are the big ones. Gooley, Norlinder, guys like that. But then you look at Ryan Poehling becoming an NHL player. You look at Corey Schooneman becoming an NHL player, Michael Pezzetta becoming an NHL player, and they're not top players, but you need these guys to be in the mix, and that's what's going on in Laval. Like look at the guys like they got called up during the COVID hit. Raphael Harvey Pinard, all these guys, Joel Teasdale, who was hurt early in the year. These guys, if they can come up and be NHL players, you're laughing, right? Because if you have they've had 10 picks a year for the last 4 years or something like that. Like
yeah, they've been making tons of picks. And like some decent since high picks too.
Yeah. Since 2018, they've had at least 10 picks every year. And in 2017, who did they pick that year? They got Poehling, they got Ullinen, they got Primo, they got Josh Brook. Actually, Ullinen was 2018. That's wrong. But I'm thinking of Joni Ikonen. But they got Poehling, Brook, and Primo in that 2017 draft. And so if that's where it kind of shifted a little bit. And 2018, we're not going to talk about Kotkaniemi, but then you have Harris, and you have Ullinen, who was in that draft. Ronov was in that draft, and you're getting these guys that are coming up, and Laval is stocked with prospects now, and we didn't see many of them because everyone was hurt. But that's the whole thing, is that you talk about Jordan Harris and Jaden Struble, and getting those guys and focusing on player development is huge, because if you don't get NHL players to come into your lineup, it doesn't make a difference. Like, whether you get Shane Wright or Logan Cooley or Uros Lukovsky, like any of those guys in the draft, in the top 7, let's say, if you don't get Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki playing well, what's the point? Yeah. Right? Like there's no players going to turn this around. Like there's no Connor Bedard in this draft, right? So you need those guys to kind of go in. And, if you get a Shane Wright, and Shane Wright, I think he's getting hit for what he isn't, which is a generational talent. We use that every year. It's not generational anymore. Like it's, there's one generational talent. That's Connor McDavid, maybe Austin Matthews. But like, no, generational talent is not something that happens every year. But if you can get a solid player like Shane Wright is, Are you telling me that like people are comparing to Patrice Bergeron? You're telling me that you would not take Patrice Bergeron first overall, right? Like, are we really in a point where you're going to complain about that? Like, if you can guarantee your first pick is going to be someone like Nick Suzuki, don't you take that every day? Like, I just feel like that's we're kind of thinking about like these number one picks and what they should be and what they can be, but I mean, you know, I just feel like they're such unrealistic. Like everyone has to be a Connor McDavid, and that's just setting yourself up for disappointment. Like look what's happening with Jack Hughes or Alexi Lafreniere. Like they're
Jack
still young.
Eichel.
And yes, yeah, Jack Eichel. Like it's just like Tyler Seguin is like another good example of that, right? Like Taylor Hall, Tyler Seguin, right? Like I just feel like people don't understand how good some of these players are, and you know, it doesn't mean that you're bad, and it's just yeah, it's a group think, I think, because we're like, oh, Shane Wright's top 2 center at best. It's like, okay, that's still pretty good.
Yeah.
Like what, you know, it's just that's my rant, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's a difference between, you know, getting somebody who might be a top 2 center in the middle of the first round or something versus getting somebody who is guaranteed a top 2 center like
Right.
tomorrow, right? Like Shane Wright will probably be in the NHL next year. Whether he'll be a dominant player in the NHL next year, that's up for debate, but there's a lot of good signs that he will be. We did get the request from earlier to talk about Sherratt on the power play. I did kind of write down like to talk about the power play in general because it was a terrible game for the power play. It was really rough looking tonight. Just like nobody could make a good decision. I will say you got to give credit to the Senators for how tightly they checked Caulfield and Suzuki. I thought they were all over those guys. They saw very quickly that they were the key to the power play, and it just kind of all fell apart from there. But Sherratt, yes. From the moment he took a shift on that second wave of the power play and handcuffed Caulfield right in front of his own net, and then trying to handle the puck afterwards, and I think he like turned it over twice in a matter of a couple seconds. It was not good, and I said during the game, may as well just put Schunem in there on the power play because at least he can move the puck efficiently, and I thought he was making some good offensive reads. I think there's like the idea of showcasing Sherratt and being like, oh, look, he can play in all these situations. But unless the general managers aren't watching and are only checking ice time, I don't think playing him on the power play is increasing his trade value.
Well, I think the whole thing with Ben Sherratt, and I mentioned during the game that Arturi Lehkonen had the best trade value of the Canadiens, and I said by far, and it's probably not by far. Like Ben Sherratt has a lot of trade value, but I think a lot of what Ben Sherratt brings is what he's going to do in the playoffs, right? Like it's what GMs are looking for at the trade deadline is basically what the Canadiens saw the last 2 years, right? Ben Sherratt was okay in the last 2 regular seasons, right? Like he wasn't great, especially his first year. He wasn't great in the regular season.
I wouldn't even give him okay, honestly.
yeah, okay. Yeah, he was bad. Yeah, because the whole thing was that Joel Edmondson was like starting like Ben Sherratt and then ended up very good.
Yes.
But yeah, Ben Sherratt was pretty bad in the regular season the last 2 years. But bubble in the playoff in the Toronto, he was very good. And that was like, okay, maybe they have something here. And then, you know, the whole Trident thing. And then that last year was like, and a lot of that, yes, Shea Weber, it helps, but Ben Sherratt should get some credit for that as well. And I think that what benefits him the most is that when penalties aren't called in the playoffs, he doesn't get called for penalties anymore.
Yeah, you know, somebody I actually saw busted that. He actually got called for more penalties per minute last year in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. Wow. So he was taking penalties. You know what the difference was? Is that in the playoffs last year, heading into the Tampa Bay series, Harry Price had something like a 98.3% save percentage on the PK. Like they literally did not allow a power play goal from, I think it was like game 4 against the Leafs up until the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, that's true. Like, that was the major thing, right? Like, and everyone was like, oh yeah, Luke Richardson figured it out. No, it's just goaltending.
Yeah. absolutely spectacular goaltending, covered a lot of flaws, and the same was true of even strength. And I think like that whole idea of like the big four guys lumberjacking their way through the playoffs, like sure it has like a modicum of an effect, and maybe over the course of a 7-game series they start wearing guys down. But in terms of it being a great defensive strategy, I find whenever Sherratt gets really physical, that's when he's at his absolute worst because he's ignoring the puck and it's always behind him. And like earlier in the season when he was like aggressively pinching and trying to play offense all the time and kind of ignoring defense, his numbers were spectacular. And like, listen, yes, he was playing with Jeff Petrie, who was struggling, by the way, but Ben Sherratt's numbers to start the year were great. Ever since he's kind of settled into being normal Ben Sherratt, he's back down to like I think it was Jay Fresh posted a couple of weeks ago, or no, maybe not a week, 1 week ago. He has like a 0% percentile in WAR, which means he's like among the worst in the league. But other GMs, don't look at that. We don't need to be talking about that right now.
It's all about marginal gains, right? Like that, playoff teams don't need 100% WAR because it's not necessary. They're already good teams. They just need that incremental change. And that's what
But if you're not,
brings.
but if you have a negative impact, you're not actually increasing anything. But anyway, I digress.
Details. That's not my decision to make, Andrew.
Yeah, this is not the game to really crap on Ben Sherratt. He was all right by the numbers, so we'll leave him with that. There were some other like more esoteric, or not esoteric, but just grander questions going on. I had some questions that I saw on social media. Artturi Lehkonen, do we think he gets an even bigger return than Tyler Toffoli if he gets traded this year?
I don't think bigger than Toffoli, but
no,
I think
Toffoli's pretty big. I think he gets a first round pick though.
I think he should. I don't think you trade him if you don't get a first round pick, right? You look at the Blake Coleman trade, and who was the other guy that they traded? Barclay Goodrow. I think Lehkonen's better than either one.
He's way better than Barclay Goodrow.
Yeah, and he has team control, right? Like I think if you're a team like Tampa or a team that's like Colorado, maybe where you're like just one, like imagine him with Nazem Kadri. Like
yeah, I've heard Colorado out there a lot. Yeah.
Because I mean, you look at what he did with Philip Deneau in the playoffs, right? Like he just completely shut down other teams. Like you didn't have to worry. Like he Mark Stone, right? Like that line, Mark Stone. Like he's not used to having that happen to him. And I just think that we talk about incremental gains, and I was kind of joking about it with Ben Sherratt, but Artturi Lehkonen is that guy that like good teams see value in him.
Yes.
Right. Like if you're a good team, you know what Artturi Lehkonen can bring you. And I think that that's something that, teams that are in the bottom part of the draft, I don't think you trade him if you don't get a first round pick. Like if I'm Kent Hughes, I don't trade him.
Why that's the other thing is like, if I'm dealing with Colorado or a team of that level, I'm telling them I want a 2023 first round pick or your best prospect or something like that, because I just don't see the point in picking 32nd for Artturi Lehkonen. I just think he's a better player than that. And I look at, I wrote about this for the Gazette. I've had a couple columns on it actually, just because I think it is an important thing to consider. Essentially, you want people through this rebuild who show you what it means to wear the jersey, right? And I pointed out like Toffoli could have been one of those guys. Well, they traded Toffoli. Brendan Gallagher is probably not going to get traded just because, like, this year at the very least, he's at his absolute lowest value. We've talked about him not hitting the net. Artturi Lehkonen might be at his highest value right now, so he might get traded, but I don't know if I would trade him unless the return you're getting is absolutely massive. Like, I just think he's the only guy who I can point to throughout Ducharme's tenure who never gave a rough game. Like, he just always was there, always giving his best. And I think overall this season, he's probably been the Canadiens' best forward, which is crazy to say because it's Artturi Lehkonen. And like for the most part in his career with the Habs, he's been kind of stuck on the fourth line. But this year, he's actually got the opportunity to move up the lineup and prove that he can do that. And I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, this is a guy who you can build a third line around, or even a second line. He can be like the mucker who creates space for the other two guys. I don't know if I move him with the team control.
Yeah.
You know, he's probably not going to get a huge amount of money. He's having a career year, yes, but I don't know. I think he cares a lot. And
Yeah.
if the plan eventually is to move Brendan Gallagher, like we've talked about it before on the stream, that the possibility of going to LA is present with Bergevin in LA, with Deneau in LA, with Dustin Brown being a UFA this summer. They have the space to do it. They're a team that's entering their competitive window. I could see that happening.
Yeah.
If they're going to move Brendan Gallagher, I think they almost are, like, they are behooved to keep Artturi Lehkonen. So it's a tough decision, but I feel like they have to consider what, like, how bad the teardown is going to be, right? And it doesn't seem like they
Yeah.
want to tear things down to the bones.
Well, that's the whole thing. Like, look, Artturi Lehkonen, you'll probably agree with this. I don't know if you will, but Lars Eller, right? Like that's the same typical kind of player where, the biggest knock on Artturi Lehkonen throughout the last few years from the fan base, from media, from lots of people is what? He gets tons of chances, but doesn't finish.
Yep.
There's something to be said about getting those chances, right? Like that's a good thing, right? Like being in the right place all the time is a good thing. But you mentioned building up into a contender, and don't you see, like, I just see like Lehkonen and Jake Evans being like that line that could be a third line right now and kind of get you like middle 6 minutes, but then go into a shutdown line once this team kind of gets into their window. You add a number, whether it's Christian Dvorak, and getting another center to go into that Nick Suzuki Dvorak range, where ironically Jesperi Kotkaniemi or Philip Deneau would have been. But like you get somebody to go into that range, and then you kind of build into that. Artturi Lehkonen is not old, right? Like in 3-4 years. And that's kind of what they're looking at. Like he's a player that's going to be perfect in that role in 3-4 years. Like I just feel like, yeah, it would take a lot, because if you don't, like, I feel the same way as when they traded Lars Eller. It's like, if you don't have a Lars Eller, a Canadian team needs a Lars Eller. So, like, what are you going to, and they end up getting Philip Deneau, which was, they ended up filling that hole anyway, but it just feels like that's the major thing, is that they're looking for someone like that. And yeah, Lehkonen has been great, and he's well liked, right? The thing that gets me about this team is last year, everyone liked each other. Like they loved each other. Everybody on this team loved each other. And I don't think I've ever seen a team that really got along as well as this team seemed to, right? From Toffoli to Caulfield to Deneau to everybody, Weber, everyone kind of got along, right? Jake Allen. And this year, they still had a lot of those pieces, but it just seemed like they didn't want to play together. But I feel like there's something to be said about the cohesiveness that this team had. And I don't think that goes away. Like, yes, winning, losing affects that, obviously. But I feel like that's the kind of thing that this team needs to build on. And you mentioned guys that they need to keep and who know what it means to wear the jersey. And Josh Anderson like jumps out as like at first I was like trade material, and now I'm like future captain. Like I just like, and a lot of that is, yes, he's playing with Suzuki and Caulfield, like, and anybody can kind of look good with those two at times, but I just feel like he's a guy that can be that kind of middle six on a contending team in 3-4 years. And kind of, you talk about Lehkonen kind of replacing Gallagher. I could see an Anderson kind of being in that role where, what's Gallagher doing now? He's playing with Hoffman and Dauphin, which is kind of Dvorak's role kind of thing. But I just feel like that those are guys that, yeah, you need to keep some of them. And I think that they really like Emil Heineman. And I think that's why they traded Toffoli when they did. And I also think that there's a stylistic thing there. I don't know if they really saw this team going in a direction where Tyler Toffoli can be Tyler Toffoli. But I feel like, yeah, Lehkonen kind of just fits this team. I think he fits any team like a glove, because he just has like, he just
versatility.
He's exactly. The versatility is kind of there. Like he can just be up and down the lineup, and there's something to be said for that. And I watch a lot of the Rocket. I'm around the Rocket a lot more than I am the Canadiens, especially recent years. But Lucas Vedamo is like the AHL version of Lehkonen, where you don't notice him when he's on the third line, but if you need somebody like to play in the top six because of injuries, you can just put him there and he doesn't look out of place. And you kind of saw that in the NHL a little bit with Vedamo this year, where he just kind of like played well. And I'm not, Lehkonen's like elite version of what Vedamo is, but like, I just feel like he has those kind of, you just you can put him anywhere. Like you put him with Armia and Paling and he looks good. You put him with Caulfield and Suzuki and he looks good. Like there's not many players that can do that. And I think that's huge, especially coming at trade deadline. Like if you're just looking for a piece to slot in, like look at Toffoli since he got to Calgary, right? Toffoli is a similar way to that, where he just kind of fit every line he was on. And Lehkonen is just really good, man. Our friend Mark Dumont always said that there's a Lehkonen test, where if you don't see the value in Lehkonen, you're not smart.
Yeah, we used to call that the Eller test back when it was Mark and I at Eyes and the Prize. Right. We used to call it, like, Eller was the litmus test, that if you thought that he sucked, you're not very smart. And we will leave a lot of people in Montreal media unnamed who were not very smart and then didn't realize that Lars Eller would be a key part in the Washington Capitals winning a Stanley Cup, including scoring the Stanley Cup winning goal, I believe. And also the overtime winning goal that got them out of the first round, which was a very close call.
The funny thing is, like, if Lehkonen gets traded this year to a contender, you can pretty much pencil that team winning the Stanley Cup too, right? Like he's just that guy. Like he always plays
a playoff player
anyway, right? He's a playoff player, and he steps it up. Like look at what he did with Frölunda before he even came to the NHL. He broke Daniel Alfredsson's scoring record in that league. When, by the way, it was a lockout year when Daniel Alfredsson was in his prime. And it just like, that's the kind, like, I'm not expecting him to do that in the NHL, but that's the kind of player he can be in the playoffs. And you look at what Eller has done in the playoffs with Washington. And I just feel like, man, if Lehkonen goes to a team that like needs that one piece, like, oh man, he's so good. Like Colorado, or even like a team like Toronto, like if he's just that bottom six in Toronto is not very good, right? Like it's not good. But if you put like a Lehkonen in there, it just completely changes some things. And I just think any team that he goes to will move up the playoff power rankings, I think, if he does get moved.
I'm with you 100%. And that's part of why I think the Montreal Canadiens should really consider keeping Artturi Lehkonen unless the offers are gargantuan. I actually forgot how good Lars Eller was in that playoffs for the Washington Capitals. 18 points in 24 games, 7 goals. Like, the only knock really on Lars Eller is that he takes a lot of dumb penalties, and Lehkonen doesn't really do that. You know, he's not a center, and he's not as big as Eller, but Lars Eller has been a very good player for a long time for the Washington Capitals, has had to fill in at second-line center a lot.
He did that year.
That year, Backstrom, I think, was out for a bit. Kuznetsov has missed time. Like, he's been a very good player for a long time now, and consistent, about a half point a game for the Washington Capitals since he was traded. Really unlocked something with him when he was given a little bit more trust. So sometimes you don't know what you got until it's gone, unless you're somebody who pays attention to the underlying numbers, and then you do know, and you get really mad at the team for making bad decisions. Anyway, I digress. John Sedgwick, we should talk about, was named the first AGM for Kent Hughes. We kind of talked about in the last stream that the whole promise of diversity has not been delivered on so far from this new management group. My thought on it was that we probably should give them until the summer after the draft, when things kind of loosen up and there's more movement between teams, to kind of start hammering down on that. But where are you sitting on this, Jared? Do you think that they need to start moving on the diversity train a little bit quicker?
I think they do, but we also have to think, look at the people who were rumored to be involved in the diversity, right? The big name was Emily Castonguay. And I think that once they were going in the direction of Kent Hughes, they didn't need another agent. And she had a connection to Vancouver. I think that might have been a thing where she only would have gone to the Canucks. And I feel like the Canadiens they don't need 2 agents in there. Once you got Kent Hughes, you're not going to hire another agent. So I could kind of understand that. Cami Granato, who got hired by Vancouver, was never coming to Montreal. Like, she has a Montreal connection, but that was never going to happen. So yes, it doesn't look good that other teams are hiring diversity.
Specifically Vancouver 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah. And when Montreal has promised it and not delivering on it. But look at who they would have been hiring. The Winter Olympics, women's hockey just ended. There's a lot of women involved with that team that would have been in Montreal sites. Danielle Sauvageau was announcing in Beijing. Gina Kingsbury was GM of that team. Carolyn Willette was broadcasting for during the Olympics as well, and has commitments to Concordia University this year. Julie Chu, same thing, commitments to Concordia University. I just feel like if you're not going to hire them as GM, which they obviously weren't going in that direction, although I think Sauvageau was interviewed, I just think that you give it more time. And yes, they hired a head of amateur scouting. They hired an assistant general manager. They hired a general manager. But there's still a lot of jobs left to be open. They're going to hire other assistant general managers. They're going to hire tons of player development. And that is where you get a lot of women. Montreal is full of women's hockey players that have tons of coaching experience, skill coaching experience, player development experience. That, there's rumors that they talked to Marie-Philippe Poulin for a job, and I don't think she's ready for that.
Yeah.
But I just feel like look, I've been on the women's hockey train for a long time. If you don't know me, that's been my thing for a long time. It doesn't look good. It doesn't pass the optics right now, but yes, I agree. Give them time. So many of these people had just come off the Winter Olympics where they were working and have commitments. And so, yeah, I'm willing to give them time, but if they come back next October and there's still no diversity, whether it's people of color or women or anything like that, and all they have is Chantal Machabé, okay, they deserve some criticism. But right now I'm willing to pump the brakes a little bit on that, because there's so many jobs. Like Jeff Gorton, all he's been talking about is expanding the front office, right?
Yeah.
Hiring tons more people, and they haven't done that. All they've done so far is backfilling.
Yep.
So I mean, Mark Bergevin had 3 assistant general managers. He had Mellenby, he had Lapointe, he had Dudley for a little bit, right? Like they're going to hire other people. Like Sedgwick is basically an assistant general manager anyway.
Yes.
when the Canadiens announced that he was assistant general manager, I was like, wasn't he already? Like
I thought that too. Yeah.
He was vice president of executive vice president of not hockey operations, but it
was legal affairs and personnel. He was running their cap for a while as well. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But Sedgwick also, I know just from people that I've talked to who know the organization, he was also doing all their analytics. Mm-hmm. He's not an analytics person, but it seems like he's now in charge of building that analytics department. And just based on what he was talking about, that department is probably going to be among the biggest in the league. He talked about specific jobs that he's looking at. And it's not just we're going to hire some guy from Twitter. He wants to hire serious scientists and then bring in hockey people who are analytics people to essentially take that and translate it for the GMs, the management group, the coaching staff to then apply, which is super exciting because that's kind of the setup that you want it to be. So from what Cedric said, I mean, I already knew he was a super smart dude, just based on the things that trickle out of the Montreal management group, that that whole Bergevin era. Everybody that I talked to who I respect was yeah, there's one smart guy in there, and it's John Cedric. He's the one guy holding on to sanity while everybody else is super emotional. So Cedric is a good one. He's going to make some good decisions. I'm super excited to see what they can build there. We have a question here from Leon or Leon. I don't know which one you'd rather go by. I don't think you've ever told me, buddy, but he's always here for the streams. Really appreciate it. Says, who's sticking around when Jake Allen comes back? That's a thing. I think Jake Allen might get traded at the deadline. I think there's a real opportunity
if he's
for
healthy.
It. Yeah, if he's healthy by the deadline, or they or if he's close and teams are, have access to his medical records, I think he could very easily get traded, and he might not be going that far. He might just be going down the road to Toronto, because they desperately need something to solidify back there, and Peter Mrazek is not the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think, thinking long term, and yes, the goaltending was an urgent need to get Andrew Hammond. They needed to get Primo out of the NHL, but I don't think you make that move if you're expecting Allen to come back, or Price for that matter. But different story. Either one of them coming back anytime soon, because you already have a logjam in Laval right now, right? You have Caden Primo, you have Michael McNiven, you have Kevin Poulin, who has been playing really good in Laval as well. So you add another goalie to that mix, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Allen will likely get traded if he's back before the deadline or anywhere close. Even if you don't get like top value for him, yeah, I think that's a good call because yeah, you look at Edmonton, you look at Toronto, you look at Vegas, who just lost Robin Leonard. There's opportunities for goaltenders, for good teams that need goaltenders,
Yeah.
and he can solidify that. Like, look what he did to Montreal, right? Like they last year, did they even make the playoffs without Jake Allen?
Not a
Legitimately?
chance. Not a chance.
It's so yeah. I just think that he's gotten a bad rap because he's not Carey Price, but he doesn't have to be Carey Price, especially this year. But
No, and especially on a
even
team that
last
isn't
year, he
built to
was
just rely on goaltending, right? Which the Canadians have been
right.
for a very long time. So, like
Right.
Jake Allen this year, his numbers are not amazing, but if you look at it based on like what he should have allowed, based on the shots that they were giving up, they're actually pretty decent. And I will say, last year I thought he was really great. Somebody says, Thomas says, "What's Jake Allen worth?" I think if he was on an expiring contract, they honestly might get like a low first round pick, but as it is right now, maybe if the Canadians hold back some salary, which they can do, they're rebuilding, who really cares? I could see them possibly getting like a second round pick. Like Jared said, you don't actually need to get a ton for Jake Allen. You need to get a decent asset, and that could be a B level prospect, a second round pick, something like in that range. You're basically finding value in a player that's probably not necessary for your club moving forward anyway, and is only signed for one more year anyway as well. One thing I did want to cover before we close it out, Jared, is Pierre LeBrun reported earlier this week that the Canadiens under Hughes and Gorton might be looking to make a splash in free agency this summer to basically move the rebuild along. And I will say, I said the day that Kent Hughes was signed as GM, that the Montreal Canadiens are probably going to aggressively pursue Patrice Bergeron. Now, I've seen people say that Hughes has also let it be known that they're looking for a veteran center. It fits the mold. He was Bergeron's agent. Bring him back home to Quebec. And I know people say that he was a Nordiques fan. I don't care. The Nordiques moved when he was a child. He was not a Nordiques fan his whole life. And people say that, oh yeah, he said that he cheered for the Bruins after that. Sure he did, because he was drafted by the Bruins. That's why he said that. Players say that stuff all the time. Charlie McAvoy hated the Bruins. You think he'll say that now? Of course not. But he deleted that tweet, which was fantastic. Everyone was tweeting it like the day that when he was drafted by the Bruins.
Drafted, yeah.
Like, who you like as a kid, sure, it bears some like passing impact on what you want to do later in life, but I don't know. I think there's a situation unfolding here where it's not wholly unrealistic that Patrice Bergeron could end up a Montreal Canadien in the summer. I think it's a weird situation because it's a rebuild for him, and like maybe he's looking for his last cup, but I could see it happening. I could see it happening.
That little bit of tampering at the All-Star weekend with Nick Suzuki getting photographs of him all the time.
100%.
But no, but
Chantal
honestly,
Maccabee set that up, hey?
probably. I mean, talk about transparency. That's a little bit too transparent, but anyway, no, but seriously, it makes sense. Like, you look, what did I just talk about with having Jake Evans and Nick Suzuki and having somebody slot into that middle six role? Like, there's an argument to be said that you can build a playoff team slowly, and to go with that big splash in free agency, there's also the whole kind of building and transformation of the roster, right? Like, they might not trade guys for picks and trade them for prospects who are like a couple years older. And he's kind of been hinting at like, we want to make this team ours, but without having to go through, not shortcutting it in the sense that Mark Bergevin shortcutted it, which is like, we're going to try and go for it every year somehow. But just trying to like finesse their way through it. And when you have a lot of long contracts that the Canadians do, you're going to be trading for guys back with term as well. Like, it's not going to be like a rebuild where you're just getting picks. And the Toffoli trade is a good example of that, right? Like, Kent Hughes even said, like, we could have gotten the second round pick, but we got Emil Heineman instead, a guy we like, who was basically a second round pick. So
But with a couple
I
years of
think that
development
there's
already, right? Which
yeah,
is a bonus.
exactly. And that's kind of an underappreciated aspect of trading, right? Like, look, you have the option, and you ask fans the option: do you want a first round pick, or do you want a guy who is going to be a second line player for his NHL career? Like, oh, we want the first round pick. It's a whole mystery box thing, right? Like, so, and I think that trading for known assets that are 20, 21 years old is an underappreciated uh thing in hockey trading. I think that that's, you look for ways that you can, get above market value. I think that's a way you can do it. And trading for 20-year-olds that might not be top prospects but are solid prospects. Like, imagine trading for like a 20-year-old Arturi Lehkonen,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Well,
like,
that's two of Bergevin's most celebrated trades, right? Phil Deneau, who's in his early 20s, and Nick Suzuki, who I think was probably 19 then, maybe
19,
20. Yeah. But like, that's the kind of trades that Hughes and Gorton are likely looking for, and what they should be looking for, frankly, because nobody really wants to bottom out forever, right? And every team that strips it for parts, like, rebuilds do work, and I think there's a lot of negativity from like specifically broadcast people and former players about the idea of like bottoming out and really tanking, which makes sense because like you don't actually want your players to buy into tanking. That's the wrong thing. You want them to keep trying to win. But if you strip it for parts too bad, it takes a long time to dig out of it. We saw it with Columbus. We saw it with Buffalo. Like, it's not necessarily a functional thing. Edmonton Oilers, hell, how many first round picks did it take for them to get into the playoffs, and they still really haven't had success. Jeff Boisvert says Phil Deneau just scored his 15th of the goal, or 15th of the year for the Kings. Yeah, it's kind of funny that Phil Deneau, and I think Kotkaniemi as well, would have been at times the leading scorer on this Montreal Canadiens team this year. Kind of sucks to lose your.
In fairness, I don't think they'd be putting up those numbers.
No, not on this team.
Montreal Canadiens.
No.
I saw like Michael Bunting. They were comparing Michael Bunting to Nick Suzuki, or so, and it's like, yeah, okay, but you flip the two, and Nick Suzuki is going to put up like 50 points in Toronto. Like, it's not the same thing. But yeah,
100%. All right, we
will Toronto again.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I will say this: there's somebody in the stream chat, Derek V, saying, "I'd love to know who of these guys have actually played a high level sport. It's easy to give your opinion when you've never played the sport." I have played the sport, obviously not at a high level, or else I'd be getting paid a lot more money to do that. But Derek, you show us your credentials, and I'll show you mine. I will say, if you think that we can't talk about the sport because we're not playing in the NHL, to put it frankly, you're a fucking idiot, because that's not how the world works. Do you think that only directors can talk about what is and isn't a good movie? Like, grow up, get a life, and go somewhere that people care about you. All right, we're gonna wrap up Game Over Montreal. Thank you everyone for tuning in, except for Derek. Shut up. And we'll see you again on Tuesday, where we'll talk about the Montreal Canadiens going for a 6th straight